The news for Europe just keeps getting worse. The French government has collapsed, plunging the EU's second-largest economy into turmoil. This political upheaval in France follows other glimpses of fractious European affairs in December. Germany is also under pressure, with Volkswagen workers striking hard. In my view, we are already in a crisis mood. Our former model is over, and if we follow our classical agenda, we will be out of the market. I have no doubt that the EU's economic momentum is now fighting for survival and struggling to keep pace with the US and China. Had the European economy grown as fast as the American economy over the past couple of decades, we would have generated €3 trillion of extra income every year. That's roughly equivalent to the total GDP of France being routinely added to the economy. Europe needs to develop a digital-era economy with companies that can challenge those from China and the US. Without this, the region is at risk of being unable to afford to protect itself in a world where security is no longer guaranteed. It's a very tense moment for the world, and Europe is at the center of it. This is one of the most consequential figures in global economics. And in September, he sounded an alarm, stating that the situation was very weak. Very weak. This morning, Mario Draghi will deliver his long-awaited report on what Europe must do to regain its competitiveness. Mario Draghi is a highly respected economist, the former president of the European Central Bank during one of Europe's most difficult times, and also led Italy through another challenging period. He has become a figure people look to in times of trouble. His report warned that the US and China were innovating so expeditiously that Europe needed to invest hundreds of billions of euros extra every year to compete, possibly to survive. The Draghi plan sparked a crucial conversation. And then, of course, there's Trump, China, the war in Ukraine, and the war in the Middle East. The conclusion was stark. Europe has been stuck in a rut, and if nothing changes and the current trajectory is maintained, then Europe will probably account for less than a tenth of global GDP by 2050, pointing to a much diminished role in the global economy in the years to come. Increasing productivity is one of the solutions to this. It doesn't mean making people work harder. It means that for the same amount of work, a person creates more value. To appreciate the challenge, let's quickly examine one of Europe's most iconic traditional industries, Italy's olive business. Worth billions of euros, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's government wants the industry to grow and help the country reduce its mammoth debt burden. That's why olive millers received tens of millions of euros in post-pandemic EU aid granted to Italy. Some farms spent their share upgrading their machinery. Productivity is one of the best ways to grow an economy, because it means for the same amount of work a person creates more value. However, as important as olives are, cultivating them isn't as productive as developing semiconductors or solar panels. Two things the US and China prioritized years ago. We haven't taken frontier technologies and dispersed them through our economy in a way that would raise incomes and our efficiency. So, by being left behind, we are now poorer and simply not keeping pace with American productivity, which is what led to the estimate that the EU economy is 18% smaller than it may otherwise have been, equating to a shortfall of about €3 trillion. One reason for this is the EU's lack of massive investments in transformative startups. We don't effectively translate cutting-edge technologies into new businesses, and we don't have hugely successful technology companies in anything like the way that the US does, or even China to some extent. One reason for this is that we don't have great venture capital markets here. Most of the world's really big companies have been funded via this actually quite tiny asset class, which in Europe sort of didn't happen. Part of it is also regulation. Europe really believes in regulation. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as I'm often told when in Brussels, that what we're doing is a blueprint for everyone else. But if you put it all together, you have a situation where you're not encouraging growth. We are behind everywhere else in the world. When people talk about billions, they sound like large numbers. But now we're talking about trillions in terms of the valuation of tech companies. Just take the biggest us ones. Over the last couple of years, if their combined value was a country, it would have the third biggest GDP in the world after the US and China. I think people are waking up to the fact that Europe really is in trouble, because not only does it not have the tech platforms, but the digital era is eating into everything. As we're seeing with what's happening in Germany with the car industry, for example. Electric cars are fundamentally digital era products. Volkswagen is at the center of this difficult transition. It's still Europe's biggest car maker and one of the EU's industrial engines. But it didn't prepare for an electric vehicle revolution, or that it would be led by an American startup called Tesla and later rivaled by China. VW became emblematic of Germany's struggle. What VW is trying to do is close up to 3 factories, potentially leading to tens of thousands of job cuts. Meanwhile, Germany's neighbor is politically and financially deadlocked. France has a number of problems, high debt being one of them. The deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it brings in through tax revenue, is very wide and proving very difficult to tackle. It's also over what the EU even allows, which is 3% of GDP. France was well past that this year and is forecast to be for some time, making investors more apprehensive about buying French debt. This line shows that the higher the line, the riskier France is judged to be relative to traditionally very safe Germany. In December, that risk was the highest it had been since 2012, when Europe was in the midst of a debt crisis, which is just compounding the fiscal difficulties that France faces. So, until there is a political resolution, it's hard to see the French economy turning around. People are waking up to the fact that France is facing a potential debt crisis, and Germany, on the other hand, is facing a potential employment crisis, where it won't have the same number of workers producing the types of things that Germany has made itself famous for. This impacts the whole of the European Union. I really don't think Europe can do anything without France and Germany agreeing and doing well. You need those two economies to push everyone else, and everyone else trades with them. So, we have no options. We need them to do well together. This is the state of Europe that Mario Draghi rang the alarm about. The bloc is too reliant on traditional industry, too unproductive, too uncoordinated, and too averse to risk. This fractured political landscape in which countries look to protect their own interests over those of the Union makes change difficult. So, what's next? Where do we look for warning signs or silver linings? The euro against the dollar is a good diagnostic for where Europe is being left behind. It's trended downward and traded at equal value only a handful of times. But to command geopolitical weight, you need a big economy in dollar terms. So, crossing that parity threshold is a worrisome indicator for economists and politicians. A fall to par could embolden populist politicians who oppose the currency, raising the remote but real threat of another Brexit-like event. Germany's right-wing AfD party has said it's planning an election campaign advocating this. But experts, including Draghi, have stressed that change, however difficult, is possible. Cars, machines, robots. This kind of precision engineering required to create this kind of hardware is something Europe is traditionally very good at, particularly northern Italy, southern Germany, Switzerland. These places that are very good at making things very well may play a pivotal role in where we produce high-quality technological goods going forward.